Hi, this is Laura again. I want to just go through a little bit of detail on the site budgets. You should have watched the interview that Dr. Ward had with Dr. Kirikanis, who gives you from a principal's perspective what you need to do to put together a site budget. I'm going to give you a little bit of the technical side that you can use in the future as a resource. So we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between restricted and unrestricted dollars, and then we're going to talk in general an overview of a site budget, how you're going to understand and be able to read it. So districts, thus school sites, are funded with federal, state, and local dollars. You should know that from your reading by now. The primary source of funding for school districts in California is going to be the local control funding formula, which is going to be paid through a combination of local property taxes and state aid. And it's generally appropriated, the amounts are appropriated every year in the state budget. And you know from your reading that there is a minimum funding guarantee that was passed under Prop 98. So unrestricted revenues. Unrestricted revenues are those revenues that don't really have any strings, and your local school board has complete control over how those funds are used. And these are the funds, as we've talked in the past, that fund the operations of the district, thus your classrooms. Some good examples of this are your LCFF funding, unrestricted lottery, and interest. On the other side is restricted revenues. You have a lot less restricted revenues to worry about now with the advent of LCFF, but what they're talking about when they call them restricted, that means they're restricted by statute or by the granting agency. So whoever is giving you the money has strings attached, and that means in order for you to spend the money, you have to spend it the way they tell you to spend it. So you have very limited local flexibility. Some examples of that would be No Child Left Behind, your restricted lottery, special ed dollars, child nutrition dollars, and any special grants or donations that you might receive. So let's talk a little bit about why is the budget so important. Really, if you think about it, what the budget is it's your educational plan for your school site, for the district, whatever, could be your personal, if you have a budget at the teacher level, that is expressed in dollars and cents. Your budget should follow your goals, not the other way around. So let's talk about site budgets. We're going to talk about three different things. Where does the money come from? Once you've got it, how do you spend it? And then how do you read and understand your budget? So most of your money comes from the unrestricted general fund. These are the monies that pay for your teachers, pay for your general supplies, those kinds of things. The bulk of it will come to you through the LCFF on it. Perhaps that comes to the district by ADA. How it comes to you is up to the district. Unrestricted lottery dollars are probably appropriated at your school level. Mandated costs, perhaps. Interest, and any other site allocation that the district gives to you. You'll get restricted dollars in your budget, perhaps. Those will be any of your federal programs, your special grants, entitlements, and donations. So really, as a site principal, you're always balancing your budget between what you need, what your plan calls for, and what your funding sources are. So how do you make those spending decisions once you've got your money? Your budget should reflect your programmatic goals. So what is it you're trying to accomplish and how are you going to accomplish it? Perhaps you want to spend a lot of money on some staff development in a particular area, Common Core, for example, or maybe you need to upgrade the equipment in your school site, since we're talking about technology. Those are the kinds of things that you need to know, and you heard Dr. Kirikanis tell you that you need to have your mission and your goals in front of you when you're looking at your budget. You're going to look at the restrictions in each of those funding sources and what those restrictions are by funding site. You're going to be looking at your school site council spending plan. What is it your site council wants? And then you're going to have to be paying attention to the program deadlines that are tied to those revenues and what the rules are with regards to carryover between one year and another. So the reality is you never have enough money. You're always going to be allocating limited resources and trying to prioritize on what the best way to spend your money is to get the highest impact for student achievement. So let's talk a little bit about how to read and understand your budget. At each district, they budget differently. They could be budgeting on a centralized basis, which basically it all comes into the district office, and then they allocate the monies for your teachers. They allocate so much per student for supplies, and they come to you that way. Or they could be very decentralized, where they just say, you've got 500 kids, we're going to give you this amount of money. You decide what your staffing is, what you need as far as staff development. Here's your lump sum, you figure it out. So you're going to make those decisions perhaps, or the district will be making those decisions. But either way, you're going to be using it, and your budget is going to be put in a format called the standardized account code structure. That's a structure that's outlined by the state of California. One of the links that we've given you with regards to more information on accounting is to the CSAM, the California School Accounting Manual. That is the manual, the official accounting manual for the state of California and school districts, and how they're required to code expenditures and revenues so that we have consistency across the system in reading and understanding financial data. So this is the way the structure is laid out. I've given you a couple of different samples in some of your links. One is a sample that we use here in the county of San Diego because almost every district, San Diego is also on PeopleSoft, but almost every district is or will be on our county office finance system. So there's the different components that are laid out for you like this, and you can see it in the account string. What I will say to you, each of these components, fund, resource, project year, goal, function, object, and school, several of them can be expanded. So you'll note in some of your examples, I also gave you an example from Capistrano because it looks a little different, just to give a flavor to you to a little bit of the flexibility that districts are allowed. But basically, these are the primary components that every school district account number has to have. So let's walk through each individual item so we can talk a little bit about what they are. When you're looking at a fund, if you think in terms of a company or even maybe a project, but for a school district, a fund is a set of self-balancing items and accounts that all have to do with specific activities. So for example, the operation of schools and the instructional program and all the things that that takes generally come under the unrestricted operating budget or Fund 1. So you have a separate, probably, fund for child nutrition so that all the revenues and expenses for child nutrition go over to Fund 12. There's the same kind of fund perhaps in adult ed. Maybe the district, like our district, we kept our deferred maintenance fund, so all the revenues that come in and expenses that have to do with deferred maintenance on all of our facilities reside in one fund. Are you beginning to see the commonality? When the revenues and expenses all have to do with one major activity, those get accumulated in a fund. The resource is that unique identifier that identifies the funding source. So if it's an unrestricted dollars like LCFF, the funding source is unrestricted, it's going to be 0000. Where the resources really become important is when you talk about restricted funds. So restricted items like special ed, like Title I, Title III, unrestricted lottery, let's say, lottery's a little different, but unrestricted lottery, all those special funds, you might get TIG money or something, those have unique resources that are assigned by the state so that any monies or expenditures associated with that item are all coded with a specific unique resource. So you can always pull. And so the state, in reality, the state or the federal government or whoever gives you the money can actually go pull the revenues in that resource and all the associated expenses so that they can validate and audit your expenses to make sure that you have expended your funds in the ways that they have said you could spend that are legal. So those are the resources that are specific to funding sources. Project year, this is I consider a minor field, and you usually only use it for federal programs because the federal fiscal year is a little bit different than the California and your normal school year. School districts operate from July 1 to June 30. The federal government usually operates from October 1 to September 30. So in that overlap, sometimes you have 2 project years of federal funding going at the same time, so you may want to separate those revenues and expenses so you can track and look at those separately. The goals identify the instructional goals or the objectives of the LEAs. So they're going to have specific goals for those funds. So it could be regular education, it could be special ed education, it could be, if it's a district-wide goal, it would be 0, 0, 0, 0. But they have sets of goals for different kinds of instructional goals so that you can track your expenses when you're looking to see what does it cost for you to do your K-12 educational program, or what does it cost for preschool. You can pull it by goal. Functions. Functions describe the activity or the service. For example, the function of instruction would be 1,000. The function of school administration would be 2,700. So this component of the account number tells you what the function of that expenditure was. The last piece, which is probably the most important piece, it's not the last piece, but it'll be the last one we talk about at this point. The other one's kind of self-explanatory, but object is really the number that captures the service or the commodity or the specific kind of expenditure we're talking about. It's a classification of expenditures, and we'll talk about that. And they also classify revenues, but primarily for your purposes, it'll be classifying expenditures. So let's talk about that a little bit, because that's really where you're going to see most of your expenditures in your budget. This is the list of the major expenditure categories. So certificated salaries will fall in the 1,000 numbers, classified in the 2,000 numbers. All employee benefits will fall within 3,000. Depending on the benefit, it breaks down. 3,400s would be health and welfare. You've got 3,100, 3,200, which are STRS and PERS. So these are the major classifications. So if you're buying supplies, they're going to be in the 4,000s. If you're going to hire a professional speaker to come do professional development, it'll be in the services under 5,000. Other outgo are other things that probably aren't going to affect you, but that gives you an idea. The 8,000s, which will affect you, are your revenue accounts. The last piece is the location or the school number. So sometimes districts want to identify a set of accounts and run reports for a particular school or a particular cost center. And so this particular component will identify that. General guidelines. When you're looking at your budget, you need to understand and identify your parameters. You know, the types of funds and the restrictions that apply to you. You need to know your district board policies, your collective bargaining agreements, any mandated expenditures that you're going to be required to make, and any local agreements that you have. So you need to identify who the budget guru is in your school so that you know who to ask questions. Know your deadlines and be sure you get to that person well in advance so you don't miss your deadlines. Know which funds can be carried over so that you don't end up giving back funds, and because you don't want to lose them. You need those. So in a nutshell, that's really the simplified version of how to look at your budget. If you have any questions, then you could email me or we can talk about them in our Wednesday night 1-hour get-together.